Let me be very clear about what happened in low Earth orbit between 3:42 and 4:18 GMT this morning, because this is not a weapons test. This is not a demonstration of emerging technology. This is not even a strategic signal in the traditional sense that military analysts have been discussing since China conducted its first anti-satellite test in 2007. What it is the operational deployment of a capability that fundamentally invalidates every assumption American military planning has made about space-based systems for the past 30 years. Having spent decades inside the system, having watched how threat assessments get constructed and how uncomfortable intelligence about adversary capabilities gets quietly managed around when it conflicts with procurement priorities and strategic messaging, I can tell you with absolute certainty that what China demonstrated this morning was not improvised. It was the culmination of a systematic research and development program that American intelligence agencies have been tracking, but that policymakers have been unwilling to address because addressing it would require fundamental restructuring of how American military power is organized and employed. Stay with me, because by the end of this analysis, you will understand something that is not being discussed in any public forum. You will understand why this event represents not a temporary disruption, but a permanent vulnerability that cannot be fixed through additional investment or technical countermeasures. 4 satellites. That is the number of American military reconnaissance and communications satellites that went offline within a 36-minute window. These were not obsolete systems or peripheral capabilities. These were Block 3 GPS satellites providing precision navigation and timing for every American weapons system dependent on satellite guidance, reconnaissance satellites providing real-time intelligence on adversary activities in the Indo-Pacific, and communications relay satellites enabling secure command and control between forward deployed forces and central command structures. The loss of these 4 satellites, even temporarily, degrades American military capability across every operational domain. What makes this attack strategically significant is not the number of satellites disabled, but the demonstration that China possesses capability to target and neutralize American space-based assets at will. The attack employed a directed energy weapon system that American intelligence has designated SC-19 Mod 4, a ground-based laser facility located in Korla, Xinjiang province. The system has been under construction since 2019 and became operationally capable, according to intelligence assessments, sometime in late 2023. What American intelligence did not know, or at least did not brief to policymakers, was that the system had achieved sufficient power output to disable military satellites in medium Earth orbit rather than just low Earth orbit systems. That is a capability threshold that changes everything about how space-based systems can be defended and what vulnerability American forces face in any future conflict with China. Let me walk you through what actually happened in technical terms, because understanding the physics explains why this capability is so difficult to counter. The SC-19 Mod 4 is not a kinetic kill vehicle like the system China tested in 2007 that destroyed a weather satellite and created a debris field that endangered every satellite in that orbital plane. This is a directed energy system that focuses coherent light on satellite components, primarily solar panels and optical sensors, creating thermal damage that degrades or destroys functionality without creating debris. The targeting requires precise tracking of satellite trajectory, atmospheric compensation for laser beam distortion, and sufficient dwell time to achieve damaging energy levels. The fact that China successfully engaged 4 separate satellites in 36 minutes demonstrates not just that the system works, but that China has operationalized the capability, with fire control systems enabling rapid retargeting. The first satellite hit was a GPS Block 3 unit in medium Earth orbit at approximately 20,000 kilometers altitude. The laser engagement lasted approximately 4 minutes, during which solar panel efficiency degraded by 73%, according to telemetry data that reached ground stations before the satellite went completely offline. The second engagement targeted a reconnaissance satellite in lower orbit, providing imagery intelligence over the South China Sea. Optical sensors were blinded within 90 seconds. The third and fourth satellites were communications relay platforms that went dark after engagements lasting between 2 and 5 minutes each. The pattern demonstrates not just capability, but refined operational procedure that has clearly been practiced and optimized. Most people stop here and focus on the immediate tactical impact. They miss what I am about to explain next, which is the strategic mathematics that explain why this capability fundamentally changes military balance between the United States and China. American military doctrine for the past 3 decades has assumed dominance in space-based systems. That assumption undergirds precision strike capabilities, real-time intelligence collection, secure global communications, and navigation systems that every platform from aircraft carriers to individual soldiers depend upon. The American military is more dependent on space-based capabilities than any military in history. That dependence has been treated as an advantage because American space capabilities exceeded those of any potential adversary. What China has demonstrated this morning is that dependence is a vulnerability when adversaries develop capabilities to deny access to those systems. The GPS disruption alone has cascading effects across American military operations worldwide. Every precision-guided munition depends on GPS for terminal guidance. Every aircraft depends on GPS for navigation when GPS-denied backup systems are unavailable or degraded. Every ground vehicle uses GPS for positioning and movement coordination. Naval vessels rely on GPS for navigation in littoral environments where traditional navigation methods are insufficient. The temporary loss of 4 GPS satellites degrades coverage in the Indo-Pacific to levels where precision strike operations become unreliable and where navigation depends on backup systems that have not been prioritized or maintained because GPS was assumed to be continuously available. The reconnaissance disruption is equally significant. American operational planning depends on real-time intelligence about adversary force dispositions, movements, and preparations. Without continuous satellite reconnaissance, American commanders operate with intelligence that is hours or days old rather than minutes old. That delay creates windows of opportunity for adversaries to conduct operations without American knowledge, to relocate forces between intelligence collection passes, and to prepare defensive measures against American strikes. The intelligence advantage that American forces have taken for granted for 30 years disappears when satellite reconnaissance becomes unavailable or unreliable. But if you think those immediate tactical impacts tell the full story, they do not. Because the real strategic significance is what this capability means for any potential conflict over Taiwan. Let me explain the operational scenario that every military planner is now recalculating. In any conflict over Taiwan, American military intervention would depend absolutely on space-based systems. Command and control of forces operating across the Pacific requires satellite communications. Precision strikes against Chinese anti-access systems require GPS-guided munitions. Intelligence about Chinese force movements requires continuous satellite reconnaissance. If China can disable American space-based capabilities at the outset of conflict, American operational plans that depend on those capabilities become non-viable. The timing window is particularly important. American satellite constellations can tolerate losing individual satellites because coverage is maintained through redundancy. But if multiple satellites are disabled simultaneously, coverage gaps emerge that take hours or days to close through orbital mechanics and satellite repositioning. Those gaps create operational windows where Chinese forces can operate without American detection or targeting. The window does not need to be long. 12 to 24 hours of degraded American space capabilities could be sufficient for China to achieve fait accompli over Taiwan before American forces could effectively intervene. What comes next is where things take a serious turn because the strategic response to this vulnerability is not straightforward and will require choices that American policymakers have been avoiding. The traditional response to vulnerability in military capabilities is to increase hardening and redundancy. For space-based systems, that means launching additional satellites, developing more resilient designs, and creating backup capabilities that can operate when primary systems are degraded. The problem is that every one of those solutions is extremely expensive and time-consuming while countermeasures continue to evolve. A GPS constellation requires a minimum of 24 satellites for global coverage. Full operational capability with redundancy requires 31 satellites. The current constellation includes 31 active satellites. If China can disable 4 satellites in 36 minutes, the entire constellation could theoretically be degraded to below operational threshold within 4 to 6 hours of sustained attack. Replacing satellites requires launches that take months to plan and execute. Even if replacement satellites were available immediately, orbital insertion requires weeks to achieve proper positioning. The asymmetry between attack speed and reconstitution time is enormous. The cost asymmetry is equally problematic. Each GPS Block 3 satellite costs approximately $500 million. The total GPS constellation represents investment of approximately $16 billion. The SC-19 Mod 4 ground-based laser facility that China employed this morning costs, according to intelligence estimates, approximately $800 million to construct and $50 million annually to operate. China can target the entire GPS constellation with 3 or 4 additional facilities for a total investment of under $4 billion. The cost-exchange ratio is 4 to 1 in China's favor, and that does not account for the operational tempo advantage that ground-based systems have over space-based assets. The reconnaissance and communications satellites face similar mathematics. Each military reconnaissance satellite costs between $1 and $3 billion depending on capabilities. Communications satellites range from $500 million to $2 billion. China could build a dozen ground-based laser facilities capable of targeting the entire American military satellite architecture for less than the cost of replacing a dozen satellites. And unlike kinetic anti-satellite weapons that create debris fields affecting all satellites in an orbital plane, directed energy weapons can be employed repeatedly without creating long-term space environment problems. I want to pause here and address the argument that will inevitably emerge from the Pentagon and defense industry. The argument will be that the United States can develop countermeasures, that satellite hardening can mitigate laser effects, that additional satellites and diversified orbital planes can create resilience, and that American space capabilities remain superior overall. Having watched how threat assessments get constructed to support preferred narratives and procurement priorities, let me explain exactly why that argument is strategically inadequate. Yes, satellites can be hardened. Yes, additional satellites create redundancy. Yes, countermeasures can reduce vulnerability. But all of those solutions are expensive, time-consuming, and create additional complexity while adversary capabilities continue to advance. The deeper problem is that the fundamental strategic assumption that space is a domain where the United States maintains permanent advantage has been invalidated. Space is now a contested domain where adversaries can deny American access to critical capabilities. That changes everything about how military operations must be planned. It means that backup systems that do not depend on space-based assets must be developed, maintained, and integrated into operational planning. It means that forces must be able to operate effectively when GPS is unavailable, when reconnaissance is degraded, and when communications must rely on non-satellite systems. Those capabilities have atrophied over 30 years of GPS dependence and satellite dominance. Now, let me explain why this situation carries implications far beyond American military capability. Because what we are watching is a fundamental shift in the strategic balance between the United States and China that has been developing for 2 decades, but is only now becoming operationally manifest. China has pursued a systematic strategy of developing capabilities that target American vulnerabilities rather than attempting to match American strengths. China cannot build an aircraft carrier fleet that rivals American naval power. China cannot develop a global base structure that matches American presence. China cannot field a military that exceeds American capabilities across all domains. What China can do is develop specific capabilities that deny American advantages in any conflict scenario that matters to Chinese core interests. Anti-satellite capabilities are central to that strategy. So are anti-ship ballistic missiles that can target American carriers. So are cyber capabilities that can disrupt American logistics and communications networks. So are hypersonic weapons that can penetrate American missile defenses. Each of these capabilities targets a specific American vulnerability created by the way American military power has been organized. The genius of Chinese strategy is that these capabilities do not need to be employed successfully across global theaters. They only need to work in the Indo-Pacific during the specific window when conflict over Taiwan or other regional flashpoints might occur. Russia is observing Chinese success and adapting similar approaches. Russian military modernization has emphasized electronic warfare capabilities, cyber operations, and anti-satellite systems precisely because these capabilities target American dependencies and vulnerabilities. Russia cannot match American conventional power globally, but can create localized denial of American advantages in regions where Russian interests are engaged. The Syrian intervention demonstrated Russian electronic warfare capabilities degrading American intelligence collection. The ongoing Ukraine operation has revealed sophisticated Russian cyber capabilities targeting logistics and communications. The development of anti-satellite capabilities follows the same strategic logic. Every regional power currently facing potential American military intervention is recalculating what capabilities are necessary for deterrence. The lesson of the past 2 decades is that attempting to match American military power conventionally is futile and economically ruinous. The lesson that China has now demonstrated operationally is that targeting American dependencies and vulnerabilities is strategically effective and economically sustainable. North Korea is developing capabilities along these lines. Iran has invested heavily in asymmetric systems targeting American regional presence. Every adversary and potential adversary is studying what works against American power and what investment priorities make sense given their specific strategic circumstances. Stay with me for this final section because I want to be very clear about what this means for American strategic positioning and policy choices ahead. The satellite attack this morning is not an isolated incident. It is a data point in a pattern that has been developing for years. That pattern is the systematic erosion of American military advantages that have defined the strategic environment since the end of the Cold War. Space dominance is being challenged. Naval superiority is being contested. Air supremacy in defended airspace is no longer guaranteed. Logistics networks are vulnerable to disruption. Every assumption that American military planning has depended upon is being tested by adversaries who have studied American methods and developed counters. The policy response cannot be simply to outspend adversaries in an attempt to restore previous advantages. The United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined, yet adversaries continue to develop capabilities that target American vulnerabilities effectively. Throwing additional money at satellite programs without addressing the fundamental strategic problem that space is now contested and American military operations depend too heavily on space-based systems will not restore security. What is required is fundamental rethinking of how American military power is organized, what capabilities need to be developed, what dependencies need to be reduced, and what strategic objectives are achievable given evolving adversary capabilities. The diplomatic implication is that American freedom of action in regional conflicts is constrained by adversary capabilities that can impose costs American policymakers may not be willing to accept. That does not mean American military power is obsolete or that deterrence has failed. It means that the calculus surrounding intervention decisions has changed. Presidents considering military action must account for vulnerabilities that previous generations did not face and for costs that extend beyond traditional battlefield casualties. That is a different strategic environment requiring different approaches to both deterrence and diplomacy. The Taiwan question specifically becomes more complicated when American space-based capabilities that any intervention would depend upon can be degraded or denied by Chinese counter-space operations. That does not mean defending Taiwan is impossible. It means that operational plans that assume continuous GPS availability, satellite reconnaissance, and space-based communications need to be revised to account for degraded or denied space environment. Whether those revised plans are militarily feasible and politically sustainable are questions that need honest assessment rather than comfortable assumptions. If this analysis has helped you understand why China's anti-satellite capability demonstration represents not a technical achievement, but a strategic shift in military balance, then share this video. Share it with anyone who believes American military superiority is permanent and unchallengeable, with anyone making policy recommendations based on outdated assumptions about American advantages, with anyone who needs needs to understand that comfortable narratives about American power are being systematically invalidated by adversaries who have studied our dependencies and developed effective counters. Subscribe, because the people who will navigate what comes next are those who understand that the strategic environment is changing faster than policymakers are willing to acknowledge. Leave your thoughts below. What do you believe is the most consequential implication of China demonstrating operational anti-satellite capability? Is it the immediate degradation of American military space-based systems, the long-term strategic shift in Indo-Pacific balance, the demonstration effect encouraging other adversaries to pursue similar capabilities, or the requirement for fundamental restructuring of how American military power is organized? I read everything you write, and these conversations matter because collective understanding of strategic shifts is how policy eventually adapts to realities that institutions are reluctant to acknowledge. Stay informed, stay clear-eyed, because what happened in orbit this morning is not a temporary disruption, but a permanent change in the strategic environment that will define military competition for decades, and understanding that change is essential for anyone who takes American security seriously.